Today we'll walk you through the interview process that candidates go through, and we'll actually go into some real life business cases that Fabian and I presented during our interview process. We'll also go into some tips and tricks on how to do well in this part of the interview. Hello and welcome to our YouTube channel, The Life at Miro. All right, let's jump into it. It's funny, I got into product management not really knowing what it was. I was really into analytics, user data, kind of really understanding what makes people tick. I always thought it was interesting. Before Miro, I was working at a startup, e-commerce startup, focused on helping brands ship more efficiently to their customers. Then I worked for a large ad tech company, Omnicom, focused on making sure ads are optimized. And before that, I was doing some work in social impact. And I also did some time in grad school. So a bit, again, of a long journey. And I maybe shifted a few industries and roles, but ultimately, product kept coming back to me. Going back to my journey, I'd spent some time in analytics, in user research and user survey. And it's very relevant to my role. We have teams of analysts. We collect data. But often it's really important to just hop into the data yourself, maybe come up with some conclusions. My time doing a lot of user research was really helpful too, because I really enjoy speaking to users and understanding their pain points, and it's really great to have that sort of background that I had before, because I don't know, I'm sure you feel the same way. I love talking to users. Call. Fabian, what about you? What brought you into product management and ultimately Miro?
Yeah, totally. So started off background in design, industrial design actually. So at the time, probably the role like UX designer didn't quite exist, but always had a keen interest on building digital products. Then started off in augmented reality companies. So I actually designed augmented reality headsets and the whole 3D interaction paradigms that lived inside them. And so that was quite an exciting start to my career. And I think what I love and still love today is really helping people who do work. How can we build products that help them do their work better, essentially? And I think that also is probably the red string throughout my career that ties my various roles together. And then worked in that, and I think at one company in LA, actually, I was working there, and they didn't quite have a proper product department set up. And me, with my experience of leading large design teams, I then transitioned into that role because I had so much context on the user needs and really knew how to bring those ideas to life with the engineering teams. And from that, quite transitioned into a product role and then never looked back since then.
How did you find that transition? Was it challenging? Was it something you looked forward to, enjoyed it?
It's interesting. I think it was tough at first to give off the design head, take that off and then focus just on product, more so, orchestrating kind of the happening or the creation of the product rather than really designing it myself. But over time, I realized that I was able to scale myself much better, right? We come together and sort of build the product together. It's not just the role of the product manager to define the product. And I think I learned a lot in terms of facilitation skills. You already mentioned also talking to users directly, documenting their needs and letting the kind of solutions emerge from that. That is something that I learned as a designer. And I still use that knowledge as a product manager today, very much so,
I think having a broad experience, or if you have very specific PM experience, or if you have more other roles as well, along with PM, that brings a lot of empathy, right? So me, I'm working more analytics role, more user research role as well, coming that and bringing that to product management, I kind of understand from their perspective how they look at the problem too as well. And these are people we have to work with every day. And it's ultimately how we want to solve the problem, right? So the fact that you also come from a design background, I'm sure gives you a lot of empathy when you're thinking about working with other designers on our team and ultimately the user experience.
So when Miro reached out with this opportunity, I was super intrigued because I had actually been using Miro already a lot with my team. We obviously were working all remote. I, at that point, had moved back to Ireland and was working with the team in LA. And Miro was my absolute lifesaver to keep the team together, for us to achieve our objectives, and then to ideate and then work together. We did this extensively on Miro, so at that point I had already learned a lot around facilitation practices, using the right templates and everything. And it was really when Miro reached out, it was just oh my God, this is an incredible opportunity to further improve this way of collaborating together and working like this together?
Yeah, so for me, it was actually interesting. It was kind of the other way around. So I was looking for a new opportunity at that moment to really kind of one up what I felt my growing PM skills. And so I seeked out and I was doing some LinkedIn searching. I found Miro's postings. I reached out to somebody in my network that was connected, and then I learned how to apply, and then I applied, and then kind of moved into the application process. So that was kind of interesting and exciting for me. I was kind of self-seeking Miro, and the application process overall, it was great. I had worked with a recruiter directly. He's great. His name's Adam. It really, really made my whole journey very stress-free and just was very transparent. We started off with a screen, recruiter screen, and then eventually went to our case study, which was I think something that Miro does for all product roles, where basically you get a business case that's very specific to the respective role that you're applying for. So at that moment, I was applying for an apps and integrations product management role. So a very specific business case on identifying the next integration with a really specific goal to increase user adoption and stickiness of our users in our user base. So users that keep coming back and they stay, kind of on Miro. So that was my business case, very specifically focused. After the business case, then I think I had one additional interview, and then finally spoke to Vihar, who's our head of product.
Yeah, interesting. I think my business case was slightly different. It was very much focused on the experience of the canvas itself, which I also then later led that domain. And I think that's interesting. Yeah, from my design background, I was really excited about that aspect of as well. It's just really improving the horizontal experience of the canvas and sticky notes, shapes, whatever actually gets used at high frequency on the canvas as well.
Yeah, so speaking of those business cases, we actually got a chance to look back at the business cases that we used for applications for Miro. So it's pretty cool. And maybe I'll pass it over to you, Fabian. You can explain a bit more about your business case.
Looking back at this now, working at Miro, kind of seeing what stood out at the time, and yeah, it's incredible. Puts a total different context on it. The business case started off with a brief. So we received a brief, which is interesting. We also discovered the brief was different. It was obviously tailored to the role we were going in for. And I think I just highlighted some key things here that stood out of the brief. It of course highlights the role that I'm responsible for, so whiteboard experience, and the audience here that we're trying to improve something for the early adopter audience, the general making it easier for them to have a good first-time experience with Miro so that they actually come back and use the product and that they feel confident at adopting it. And then the pain here, struggling to understand and using the Miro whiteboard. So that's kind of the key pain point I focused also my investigation around. And then I thought what stood out to me, or what I remember well, is that I spent a lot of time actually at this time as well into improving my processes as a product manager as well. I read Product Discovery Habits from Therese Torres, which really inspired me in terms of putting more effort into analyzing what are the real problems of the users, and bringing that potentially even into an opportunity solution tree. But here, this was more an example from IBM that I referenced here. The IBM method here focusing on observe, reflect, and make as the key stages to develop a product. And I also wanted to follow this process very much in my business case here and use this as a guiding.
I wouldn't say most of the time, but you spend a good chunk of time in the beginning just taking a step back, thinking about how you wanted to tackle the case, how to structure yourself, etc.
Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, absolutely. And very much how do I want to tackle it, right? Not just. Yeah, I think the scary part would always be to just jump to some solutions, but really want to make sure that I spend enough time discovering the problem space and kind of let more the solutions emerge from that. Yeah, and then actually funny here now, while looking over it, there's some activities, so framing the problem space, and going deeper into that, even going into identifying some assumptions that I have, creating a proto-persona, and then ideating around that. From an observation perspective, this was something that I got a lot out of. What I actually did is I reached out to some friendlies in the space with quite a diverse set of experiences or different roles. So we've got someone from HR here, someone who's leading a HR department, an engineering manager, people working. Anushka has spent a lot of time facilitating processes with cities, and so she was actually someone who had experience with Miro already, and gave me a lot of super valuable insights. And then essentially led an interview with them, just like you would do in any other user research session, and gave them access to the tool, and then observed their first-time experience with Miro.
What I love what you did here is you had like an idea of the problem. You spoke to some real users. That's really impressive that you did that for your case, and then you've organized your thoughts right here. It's like a very classic Miro way of thinking.
Absolutely.
Take a bunch of stickies, throw them down, and then kind of move them around into groups, logical groups that make sense. That's awesome. I love it.
Yeah, and then making sense from there, right? And already highlighting here pain points or any observations that came to mind, and then also went actually into extracting some screenshots. And extracting screenshots actually while observing the users gave me a lot of insight into when it came to the point where I had to put some rough wireframes together myself as well. Yeah, and then I think I just wanted to emphasize that it started really messy, and I think what I felt, because it's Miro, it makes sense to keep that on the board, right? It's kind of the context from where the more clean presentation emerges. I think here you'll see in the slides as well, I kept it super bare bones, right? We didn't have time. Like probably same for you. Didn't have much time.
No, did not have much time for the case.
Working full time, so doing this on the side. Very much like also here again, structured it into observe, reflect, make. So starting with observe, highlighting the people that I interviewed, some key insights that I gained from those conversations. So this probably it seems a bit out of date at this point because it was very COVID focused as well. Meeting time has significantly increased during COVID, while the efficiency did not go up in correlation. I think those were some of the key insights.
Yeah, I think that you made a good point there, that it's good to have that structure. It doesn't, you don't necessarily need to have a high fidelity sort of like output for a case study. In fact, it'd probably be a big waste of time spending a lot of time getting your frames looking and your slides looking right. Rather, it's focused on better to focus on the product problem and understanding like the actual strategy rather than the fidelities. I think that's a good shout.
Also went into doing a journey map. So I think this, as the problem that I was focusing on was very much the first time experience, right? Getting into the product for the first time. I looked at it from this perspective and then highlighting the highs and lows and the key observations. Giving aspects like a journey map here really helps me to position or like root my insights in context, right? It makes it much easier for someone looking at this to find how I've actually approached this. Why are these things relevant in the context of in-board interactions? And you can even see this is one segment that really stood out as where a lot of friction was caused. And I actually then also later on invested my wireframes or coming up with solutions specifically on this area.
Got it. So that was kind of like where most of the users or the people you spoke to were?
Having a lot of friction, yeah. And it was interesting because it was quite consistent. It was like across the people I interviewed, the friction was experienced over and over again, giving me a lot of confidence that suggesting improvements here was worthwhile. And then taking it from the pain points, going really into how might we to diverge into what are possible opportunities. Again, identifying kind of themes. And then I think my prioritization method, not knowing what Miro's objectives are or key results are in great detail, I thought it was good to just kind of focus in on something, look at one opportunity, something that is a feature request and something that is a pain point. So also kind of highlighting the spectrum, like understanding that a positive first-time user experience is probably a composition of addressing these in the right way. And then I identified particular opportunities from this. Now we're jumping into the make stage. So here we actually, we already know, we have understood and analyzed kind of the feedback, and we have identified some that we feel like are high impact if we were to invest there. And we're jumping into the make stage. And here I've written up just some very high level product briefs, also trying to show my breadth of understanding. So I didn't want to just come in with one solution, but more so highlighting some ideas, emphasizing how we would measure the success as well, and then formulating a traditional product hypothesis as well, to ensure that whoever is looking at this business case also knows that I'm trying to achieve that impact. Yeah, here's kind of going into the solutions. I think there was an opportunity I discovered in improving the onboarding, where there's a kind of contextual, you get to try it out in the context of the tooltip rather than the tooltip just passively giving you instructions that you may not actually find out whether they work for you or not.
You made these wireframes in preparation for this.
Exactly, yeah. And they're super rough. They just made on Miro boards as well. Yeah, and then I did this for 3 of the identified opportunities, and then created that and just very much expanded, like took screenshots of the existing interface. I wasn't going to design anything new, right? Right. But very much extended what was already available and created just some very basic controls here. So just like a form, which could then help during the workshop prep, the facilitator to configure the board. Cool. I'm super excited to see what your case was about and how you tackled it.
Yeah, it's fun to go down memory lane and kind of look at what I did. So the position that I'd applied for before was PM for strategic apps and integrations in our platform team. And so that's what the prompt was. The prompt was focused on our strategic bet of capturing the market through apps and integrations and identifying a future integration opportunity to drive user acquisition and stickiness. I think one of the first things I did, very similar to you, is I kind of thought about this a little bit more, and I spent a lot of time focusing on like Miro's vision, which was not in the prompt, but you can find online, and the vision or the mission of apps and integrations. And I really wanted to just focus on that area before I got very focused on solutions. And again, Miro's goal is to empower teams to create the next big thing. And then I really focused in on the goals of the apps and integrations team to drive user acquisition and stickiness. So I use that kind of as a framework to really focus. And then I set my own future-looking vision. Like if I were the PM of this stream, 2 to 3 years, like what would it look like, right? So I spent quite a bit of time in this beginning phase of like kind of thinking about the overall objective and goal. And then I actually used something called OKR framework, which I on the prompt had mentioned increasing user acquisition and stickiness. So I made those into objectives, and I made some key results. So like some results that we wanted to hit. I had no idea what if these were the right ones or not, and I even prompted that in my response, like in my recording that I made for the interviewers and for everyone when I walked through this. I just like, hey, look, I put in some numbers here that I've come to this conclusion based on this assumption or that assumption. I made lots of assumptions. But I thought it'd be interesting to like have some real numbers. So I basically created this whole like sort of framework of like, before I even get deeper into this is like what I want to achieve. And this is like kind of what success would potentially look like. So I started there like super high level. And then the prompt suggested like, hey, focus on a persona. So I looked at a few other and this is kind of, I think, a thing I did throughout this. I spent some time thinking about a few different options and then focusing on one. So the prompt asked me to focus on a persona. I thought about like 3 or 4 different personas, including a people manager, et cetera. But then ultimately I settled on a product manager as a persona. I also, kind of based on my personal experience and those in my peers, I knew PMs had lots of influencing buying decisions as well for software solutions and integration. So, understanding a bit more about that persona could also be strategic for Miro as well. So I used the persona, and Pam was my product manager persona, actually somebody that I know from my previous life, and kind of understanding Pam's perspective, her pains, her interests, skills, et cetera, tech savviness, and then kind of started looking and started ideating at different parts of like the life cycle and the pain points that this persona kind of kind of has, and then translating those pains into how might we. So very similar to what you did of like looking at these pains that a product manager may have, and then translating those into how might we's. I also did a simulated dot voting where, again, obviously I didn't get a time to do this. I really like the how might we exercise where you identify pain points and then you translate them into opportunities. So I kind of walked through the product manager's sort of workflows and then identified what I felt were some pain points. Also did some research on that too as well. And then we did a how might we voting exercise. Obviously in this case, I didn't have all these people there, but I just kind of hypothesized that if these people were there, maybe this is kind of how they would vote. So
it's nice. So you're quite demonstrating like how you would work while also coming to some meaningful insights.
Correct. Because like at the end of the day, there's no like one perfect answer or one perfect integration to bet on, right? This is kind of what I was showing is I would love to do and how might we exercise, get some folks cross-functionally who identify these pain points. And then one of the sort of areas that I'd kind of identified is like product road mapping being sort of this big opportunity. And
amazing.
Then this is kind of one of my frameworks that I try to do is I think about persona, I think about some how might we's, and then I kind of want to test it and validate it and see like, is this hypothesis correct or should we trash this hypothesis? So what I did in this case was I did some validation to see if like, okay, does a product road mapping integration with Miro make any sense? Or is this like just me just thinking about something crazy, right? And first thing I did, like I used this tool called G2, which is like a competitive research tool that's available for free. And I found like some of the top leading product management solutions out there that we could potentially integrate with. So kind of identified them here. I looked online on all our communities. So Miro has this community where you can log in a forum and request a feature. A lot of other competitors and a lot of other partners have that too as well. So I looked at all the project management tools, all their community-like tools and identified, are these types of integrations something that people are requesting? And actually, these are actual requests. Like this is a screenshot from like the Miro community where like someone's requesting this type of integration. And also like in other product management communities where the users are actually requesting for Miro
That's very
integrations.
powerful because without access to that information, there's already enough out there to actually give you confidence that this is the right direction to put forward.
Yeah. So after this point, then I kind of felt a little bit confident that, hey, look, the direction in which I was going like makes sense, and it's something that we could invest in, right? So then how would you kind of think about the next part of, at least from my perspective, is how would I think about the actual problem? So similar to you, I kind of made this. You had a very similar frame where you made like the problem statement, kind of the why, and then like how you get there. And so in this case, I built this sort of single thing. I called it an initiative poster, but you can call it a PRD or a product requirements document or whatever you want to call it. But basically a high level set of like what's the problem, a user statement from the product manager persona perspective, and as I mentioned, those initial OKRs as some sort of framework. And then I actually did, like similar to you, I did some designs here. So I went through the actual workflow of connecting an app with Miro or an integration with Miro, and I kind of envisioned what it would look like with this product board integration. Actually did some like rough wireframing and designs of that.
And it's, I think, great to see here as well. You use existing screens, but you just augment them to tell your narrative, right?
Exactly, yeah. I know it looks quite nice, but again, like you said, these are existing screens and it's basically screenshots and me putting some more design on top of it. I think the other part, which is kind of interesting how you did that too, is like, how do you think about prioritization as a PM? And that's one of the things that I tried to address here too. And I showed what my backlog would look like if I'm a PM, because it's a question that I get all the time in my career, especially from senior leaders and other stakeholders is like, what are you doing next? Why? So for here, and this is kind of like my like little own framework that I made on my own, but that I've used many times before is like what are the criteria used? So here, each horizontal row is a project. And this is that integration that I mentioned with product board, like a V1 of it and a scope of what it would be. And then each column here kind of indicates like maybe different factors to prioritize. So like one is this a tentpole? Is this a big bet for the company? Yes or no? Is this part of our tech strategy? What objective does it align to? And then I put a RICE framework, so reach, impact, confidence, effort. So that's a way you can use to like kind of bring something up, especially if you think impact is high and effort is low. It's an effort opportunity to bring up. And then the Kano framework I also use often too, even to this day, to make sure that the mix of work that we're doing, is it all basic things? Are there performance items too? And also are there some delighters there too that are unexpected for a user? So here I think it was successful in kind of showing Miro and like kind of the interviewers and all that, like kind of this is like my like high level framework of how to think about prioritization. The last part, which was actually also an ask in my prompt, was like, how do you think about GTM and go to market? Frankly, that was interesting because I've in my previous experiences, I've done several launches, but frankly, GTM wouldn't be like, I would say, my strongest suit. So I actually took this opportunity to learn a little bit more, take some time back, look at my previous projects, think about how we did GTM, and then also I did some research, online too, and thinking about how I could package GTM for an integration. Came up with a few things, thinking about the persona, the buyer persona, and the user persona. I think that's really important too. So I thought about that. I thought about competitive, and then I thought about how we could think about partnerships. And ultimately, like once we launch this feature, how do we drive usage? You can call that demand generation, or you can call that user acquisition, whatever you want to call it. But like, what's our plan here to actually launch this feature? Because our users have limited capacity, right? There's lots of things going on in their day. What's going to make them use this integration, or what's going to make them use this feature? So kind of I focused here on doing some enterprise sales, having a beta program, so you have like some limited deep interaction with people. And then on the marketing side, we could launch some case studies, news articles, maybe do some in-app alerts. And then also I identified a very specific user group too here, enterprise and business. So I think, again, just to reiterate, are all these things the exact factual like way that this would end up in real life? I'm not sure, but I wanted to make sure to show like my thought process and my thinking and all the different angles I'm thinking about it, from competitive, from demand gen, from target audience, buyer persona, etc. One of the things I would say to any candidate here is just try to have fun with this exercise, because it is fun and it's an opportunity to grow. As you said, think about your product management end-to-end framework and or frameworks. And
play it out in
in
a
real
week
life.
or a couple of days, right?
Exactly, and then you can learn, tweak, and kind of grow as yourself. And I think that's like very, very important.
Anyone looking for a job now from PM perspective at Miro, I think I would, taking the best parts from probably both our examples here, I would definitely encourage to really understand, empathize with the needs by looking at whatever public data is available. You looked at the community. I interviewed people directly. Whatever is needed to have a very good understanding of the problem space. I would follow some process. In my case, that was observe, reflect, and make.
And in my case, like I think it was important to also have a framework of thinking. So I focused on OKRs, persona mapping, thinking about how might we's, and then kind of translating that to then ultimately solutions.
Yeah, I think that definitely gives us a much better foundation to then build on top of. I think from prioritization perspective, I really liked some examples that you shared. I think that's really powerful. I think it's important, there's a limited amount of time, so it's important not to get stuck, but to make decisions, give enough context why the decision was made, and then move onwards and forward, and focus that you don't invest too much time, you don't get stuck, that you have the end-to-end journey, exemplified journey of how you would develop a product.
So I really enjoyed talking about our journeys to product management, how we got to Miro, and our interview process, the business cases that we did too. A lot of fun, right? I think going back down memory lane and learning.
And that brings us to the end of today's video. But if you found this useful, please subscribe to our channel, and we'll catch you in the next video again.